Hey Midnights! Thank you for listening to Midnight Overdose. Subscribe to our channel. Our next story, Cosmic Horror Unleashed, Humanity's Doom approaches as Star-Devouring swarm sets sights on Earth. The silence on the bridge of the Ares V was a living thing, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of distant machinery and the frantic click-clack of Lieutenant Jen Lee's console. Commander Eva Rustova, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, knew that silence was about to shatter. For weeks, the deep space probe Vagabond 7 had been sending back fragmented, chilling data, warnings Eva had tried to rationalize away as cosmic interference. Now, she wished to God she had listened. Eva, a woman whose 42 years had been carved by the harsh vacuum of space, felt the familiar tremor of an unknown phenomenon vibrate through the deck plating. Her practical auburn hair, streaked with silver from a life spent navigating the void, seemed to prickle. She was known for her composure, a trait honed during the infamous Cerberus debris field incident, where she'd piloted a crippled freighter through a hail of micrometeoroids for 3 agonizing days, saving 27 souls. But the last few weeks, the increasingly bizarre sensor readings had been chipping away at that ironclad resolve. This wasn't a calculated risk, this was raw, unquantifiable dread. Commander, visual confirmation on the Vagabond 7 feed. Lee's voice, usually a steady stream of data, was a strained whisper, thick with an emotion Eva rarely heard from her brilliant, stoic second-in-command. At 29, Lee was a xenolinguist and sensor specialist, his mind processing data with frightening speed. Now, his hands, usually so precise, visibly trembled. Eva pushed away from her console, the stale, recycled air of the bridge suddenly heavy, carrying a faint scent of ozone and recycled coffee that offered no comfort. On the main view screen, the familiar glint of Vagabond 7 was gone, utterly consumed. In its place, a monstrous, organic silhouette pulsed into existence. It wasn't metal, not precisely. It was a shifting, undulating mass of segmented chitin, a dark, charcoal black shell that seemed to absorb all light, yet pulsed with an inner, sickly green and violet bioluminescent glow. Thousands of needle-like appendages, impossibly sharp and glistening with viscous material, writhed along its surface, each tipped with a miniature, hyper-vibrating drill designed for tearing through the very fabric of existence. It was a nightmare given form, a living, breathing void in the cosmos. "Zoom in, Lieutenant," Eva ordered, her voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her gut, though her breath hitched. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her command chair, a desperate, subconscious hold on something solid in a universe suddenly turned liquid and terrifying. As the image resolved, the sheer, horrifying scale of the alien vessel became sickeningly apparent. It was 10 times the size of the Ares V, dwarfing their state-of-the-art warship, a vessel that had cost trillions to construct and was now reduced to a speck. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, a swirling vortex of interstellar dust shimmered, not reflecting light, but emitting it as more of these silent, colossal horrors emerged, spilling from some unknown cosmic crevice at the edge of explored space, like an unholy birthing canal. The stars themselves seemed to shrink, cowering from the encroaching darkness. "My God," breathed Chief Engineer Miller, his usual cheerful demeanor shattered. At 55, Miller was the ship's resident optimist, a mechanical wizard whose booming laugh usually filled the engine room. Now, only a pale, stunned expression of abject horror remained. "They look like locusts. But on a cosmic scale. A swarm of cosmic locusts, Commander. Locusts that could tear through a moon," Eva thought, her mind racing through tactical data that felt utterly useless. Their weapons, their defenses, their strategies, none of it mattered against something so terrifyingly alien. A ripple of primal fear ran through the bridge crew. For generations, humanity had scanned the stars, pouring untold resources into the search for intelligent life. They had envisioned benevolent teachers, wise elders, or at worst, understandable rivals. They had not envisioned this, an utterly alien, utterly indifferent force of nature. This was not a species to reason with, it was a force to be annihilated by. "Life signs?" Eva demanded, her gaze fixed on the horrifying spectacle, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. "None consistent with carbon-based life, Commander," Lee reported, his fingers flying across his console. "Their internal energy signatures are chaotic. Like a superstorm contained within a living organism. It's unlike anything we've ever catalogued. It's almost like they're made of raw energy, barely contained. A singularity barely held in check." A piercing shriek, too high for human ears, suddenly tore through the ship's comms, rattling teeth and vibrating bones, a sound that bypassed the eardrum and burrowed directly into the primal fear centers of the brain. It wasn't a message, it was a declaration. The lead alien vessel, now directly in front of the Ares V, began to undulate, a slow, mesmerizing ripple of its massive form. Its vast, central mass was a dark, obsidian hue, absorbing light to create a disturbing black hole in the starry canvas. Ribbed plates, like ancient armored scales, shifted and ground against each other with a soundless friction that somehow still resonated through the Ares V's very structure. Along its immense body, myriad segmented legs, each ending in a splayed, multi-clawed foot, flexed rhythmically, as if testing the vacuum for purchase, eager to latch onto something substantial. From crevices between these armored plates, where the bioluminescent glow was strongest, emerged rows of gaping maw-like openings, each lined with multiple concentric rings of razor-sharp crystalline teeth. These weren't for biting, but for funneling. The thousands of drilling appendages, extensions of these maws, began to spin, emitting a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the Ares V's hull, a sound that spoke of unimaginable power and an even more unimaginable hunger. "They're not trying to communicate," Miller stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with horror. "They're preparing to harvest us." Eva knew, with a horrifying certainty, that he was right. This wasn't first contact. This was the arrival of a galactic plague, an all-consuming tide. The drills weren't weapons, they were tools of consumption. They weren't here to conquer, but to consume, to digest, to utterly erase. The very air on the bridge seemed to thicken with unspoken dread. This particular swarm, according to the probe's desperate final transmissions, had emerged from a collapsed nebula at the very edge of the Sagittarius Arm, a region humanity had only recently begun to explore. The Vagabond 7's last data burst had contained a fragmented translation of their species designation, extrapolated from energy patterns and subquantum fluctuations, the Xylus. Their hostility wasn't born of malice or territorial dispute. It was an innate, fundamental, biological imperative. A force of nature, indifferent and absolute. "They consume," Lee explained, his voice hollow as he projected the translated data onto the auxiliary screen, a grotesque diagram forming from chaotic energy signatures. "Their entire existence is a constant, insatiable hunger. They don't have planets, Commander. They are their planets. Each swarm is a living, evolving ecosystem that requires immense amounts of raw matter and energy to sustain itself. They've scoured their own arm of the galaxy clean. We're just the next course on their endless journey. And they are hungry." The Xylus consumed everything in their path, converting stellar dust, planetary crust, and even organic life into the energy they needed to grow and replicate. Their existence was a slow, inexorable wave of cosmic digestion. The probe's final scans. They picked up traces of other civilizations, Lee continued, his voice barely audible. "Not active, Commander. Not any longer. Just residual energy signatures, like echoes of screams across time, fading into nothingness. The Xylus didn't conquer them, they absorbed them. The data suggests their method is terrifyingly efficient. Once a swarm descends, they initiate a terraforming process, a perversion of the term. The drilling appendages puncture the planetary crust, siphoning off geothermal energy and vital minerals. The vast maw-like openings expand, creating a localized gravitational vortex that pulls atmospheric gases and even entire oceans into their internal processing organs, turning entire worlds into liquid nutrients. He paused, a visible shiver running down his spine. And any indigenous life. They don't fight it. The Xylus sheer mass and the overwhelming bioluminescent radiation they emit are enough to induce a catatonic state in most complex organisms, rendering them helpless. Then Lee's voice dropped, barely a whisper, forcing Eva to lean closer. Commander, the data from Vagabond 7 also contained biological schematics. Fragmented, horrifying. The Xylus don't just consume for sustenance. They consume to reproduce. They require massive quantities of specific resources, not just raw planetary mass like silicates and metals for their chitinous growth, but immense reserves of organic biomass. They don't just eat worlds, Commander. They eat life. Billions of sentient beings, millions of species, all reduced to biological feedstock for their horrifying replication cycle. Each fully grown Xylus vessel requires the processed biomatter of, conservatively, 2 trillion carbon-based organisms to initiate the creation of a new, fully formed Xylus entity. And that's just for one. The larger they get, the more they demand. Their internal birthing chambers are not theoretical, they're functioning, active. Every planet they strip bare, every civilization they consume, is a step closer to a new swarm, a new wave of hunger sent out into the cosmos. They are not merely consuming, they are multiplying. A cold, agonizing knot formed in Eva's stomach. It wasn't just destruction they faced. It was assimilation, a grotesque metamorphosis. Humanity wouldn't just be wiped out, they would become building blocks, components in the horrifying, endless expansion of the Xylus. The thought of Earth's teeming, vibrant ecosystems, its bustling cities, its billions of souls, all reduced to raw material for these cosmic parasites, was a far more sickening prospect than simple annihilation. Lee continued, his voice a strained monotone, as if forcing himself to recount the unspeakable. The probe's final moments, before being vaporized, recorded something unfathomable. The Xylus possess smaller, more agile drones, almost microscopic versions of the larger vessels, but these aren't for simple digestion. These are the collectors. Once a world's atmosphere is rendered inert and its inhabitants catatonic by the swarm's radiation, these drones descend. They don't just absorb. They process. They employ specialized biological enzymes to rapidly break down complex organisms, living beings, into a viscous, nutrient-rich slurry. It's not a quick death. The Xylus, in their indifference, possess an evolutionary trait that ensures maximum energy extraction. The neuro-disrupting radiation that induces catatonia also heightens sensory input, making the entire process of biological dissolution felt. Every nerve ending, every cellular process, remains agonizingly aware as the body is converted from solid form to liquid nutrient, the conscious mind trapped within a dissolving biological prison. The echoes the probe picked up from other worlds. They weren't just data signatures. They were the prolonged, agonizing screams of entire biospheres, perfectly preserved in their final moments of horrific absorption, resonating through the Xylus's collective consciousness as a sort of digestive symphony. A grotesque, cosmic choir of suffering that lasts for hours, even days, as billions of bodies are systematically and utterly consumed. They leave nothing but the bare, lifeless rock. Not even ghosts. Eva's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp of pure revulsion. The casual, scientific tone of Lee's explanation made the horror all the more potent. To be reduced to a living, screaming soup. The thought was beyond barbaric, it was an existential abomination. The chilling truth of why humanity had never encountered them before now lay in two stark facts. First, their emergence from the collapsed nebula was recent, astronomically speaking. The turbulent, collapsing gas cloud had acted as a natural shield, obscuring their vast, slow movements and chaotic energy signatures from humanity's long-range telescopes. The nebula itself was a chaotic maelstrom of gravity and radiation, a place astronomers generally avoided. Humanity's sensors were tuned for order, for predictable patterns. The Xylus were pure, chaotic entropy, a cosmic storm made manifest. Secondly, and more crucially, the Xylus emitted no discernible faster-than-light, FTL, drive signatures or conventional communication signals. Their method of interstellar travel was still a profound mystery, a slow, organic growth and propagation that didn't leave the telltale ripples in space-time that humanity's detection systems were designed to pick up from other advanced civilizations. They simply were, a living, growing wave, expanding outward from their dark origin point, leaving no detectable wake beyond their consumption. They were a force of nature, not a technological civilization, and thus, had remained utterly invisible to a humanity searching for echoes of its own kind amongst the stars. They didn't transmit, they devoured. The Xylus didn't find Earth through deliberate search, but rather through a cosmic accident of their own ravenous consumption. As the Xylus swarm slowly advanced through the Perseus arm, devouring star system after star system, their colossal organic vessels inadvertently swept up the electromagnetic detritus of millennia of galactic history. Humanity's broadcasts, traveling at the speed of light, had been steadily expanding outwards from the Sol system for over a century. By the time the Xylus leading edge reached the outer fringes of the Perseus arm nearest the Orion arm, a journey that took them hundreds of thousands of Earth years, those initial, faint radio waves from Earth were already reaching them. It began with the earliest, most powerful signals. The first large-scale, sustained broadcasts from Earth, powerful radio transmissions, early television signals, even the raw energy pulses from developing radar technology during the 20th century. These weren't sophisticated, targeted communications aimed at distant stars, they were simply the messy, inefficient, but undeniably present byproduct of a rapidly industrializing civilization. To the Xylus, who consumed everything from the most diffuse stellar hydrogen to the densest planetary core, these signals were like faint, intriguing scents in the cosmic wind. Their biological sensors, evolved to detect and categorize energy patterns for nutritional purposes, registered the complex, modulated radio waves as particularly rich forms of energy, indicative of highly organized, self-replicating matter. Unlike the simpler, more predictable energy signatures of nascent stars or gas clouds, the human signals contained intricate, repeating patterns, hinting at a vast, vibrant, and incredibly dense source of biological material. As the Xylus moved closer, consuming the intervening star systems, the Earth's signal intensified. They began to pick up not just the initial blasts of radio, but the more complex, higher-frequency signals of analog and then digital television. These richer, more intricate patterns of energy confirmed their initial readings. Here was a world teeming with life, a world ripe for consumption. The Xylus intelligence, if one could call it that, wasn't about understanding human culture or technology. It was purely predatory. They perceived the Earth broadcasts as a loud, bright energy signature, a beacon of abundant biomass and planetary resources. It was the equivalent of a hungry animal smelling a feast from miles away, not caring what species the prey was, only that it was plentiful and easily digestible. Earth had, in its eagerness to communicate with itself, inadvertently screamed its location and its immense nutritional value into the void. Their spaceships were not manufactured vessels at all, but rather colossal, bioorganic constructs that were extensions of the Xylus themselves. The individual Xylus creatures, the ones that formed the vast swarms, were essentially single-celled organisms on a gargantuan scale, capable of self-replication and specialization. What appeared to be a ship was, in fact, a single, incredibly complex Xylus organism that had grown and differentiated into a mobile, processing leviathan. Its chitinous hull wasn't a shell but a living, semi-permeable membrane, constantly repairing itself, absorbing stray cosmic dust and radiation to maintain its structural integrity. This living armor pulsed faintly with a network of glowing, vein-like channels that transported nutrients and energy throughout its titanic form. Propulsion wasn't achieved by engines, but by the subtle, yet immensely powerful, manipulation of space-time around them. They used no fuel, no reaction mass. Instead, specialized internal organs, visible as swirling vortices of light beneath their translucent skin, generated localized gravity wells and anti-gravity fields, effectively pulling themselves through the vacuum of space, like a swimmer pulling through water. This gravitic drive emitted no heat, no exhaust, no conventional energy signature that human sensors could detect, making their approach utterly silent and invisible until they were upon their prey. These vast organic leviathans possessed internal, highly specialized organs, some capable of processing raw planetary materials into usable energy, others serving as nurseries for nascent drone units, and still others acting as immense, organic supercomputers, constantly calculating optimal consumption routes. There were no bridges, no crew quarters, no control panels. The ship was the Xylus collective's extension, responding to their communal will, driven by pure instinct and shared hunger. Humankind, limited by its need for metallurgy, chemical propulsion, and digital computing, would never be able to replicate such inherently biological, self-sustaining vessels. They were not machines, they were living parts of a grand, cosmic digestive system. Their origin point, the collapsed nebula they had emerged from, was located deep within the Perseus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, a sprawling spiral arm roughly 6,500 light-years from the core, and approximately 10,000 light-years from the Orion arm, where Earth and its solar system resided. To put this in perspective for the crew, who lived in the comparative cosmic calm of the Orion arm, Lee explained, imagine Earth, a single grain of sand on a vast beach. The distance to the Xylus point of origin is like the distance from our solar system to the Andromeda galaxy, not a single star system, but an entire separate stellar island. The Perseus arm itself is a turbulent, star-forming region, prone to chaotic events like nebulae collapse, which served as both their birthplace and their long-term hiding spot. Our solar system, a relatively stable and mature planetary system, sits in a quieter, less active part of the Orion arm, a gentle eddy in the cosmic current. The Xylus had emerged from a churning, violent storm, far removed from humanity's peaceful corner of the galaxy. This immense, previously unexplored distance, coupled with their undetectable mode of travel, had allowed them to remain a hidden, growing threat for eons. Their level of advancement, compared to humankind, was not merely greater, but entirely orthogonal. Humanity measured technological progress in terms of increasingly complex machines, refined energy sources, and sophisticated artificial intelligences. The Xylus had no technology in the human sense. Instead, they had biological mastery on a cosmic scale. Their ability to manipulate gravity, to emit neurodisrupting radiation, and to phase through matter wasn't achieved through engineering, but through evolved biological functions. They were, in essence, living, breathing, cosmic machines. If humanity's peak was a supercomputer, the Xylus were the universe's most complex, self-sustaining biological program, running on a grand scale. Humankind could never hope to possess such technology, for it wasn't built, but grown. It wasn't invented, but evolved over epochs beyond human comprehension. The very concept was as alien to human engineering as manipulating reality with a thought. They weren't just thousands of years ahead, they were billions of years ahead in a completely different evolutionary and existential trajectory. Humanity was still learning to walk, while the Xylus had long since transcended the very notion of physical form. Their perception of time was perhaps the most profound difference. For humans, time was linear, measured in seconds, minutes, years, lifetimes. It was a journey from birth to death, marked by individual experiences and collective historical events. For the Xylus, existing as a vast, constantly regenerating collective, time was not a line but a continuous, present state of being. The birth of a star, the formation of a planet, the rise and fall of a civilization, these were not distant pasts or distant futures, but merely phases in an ongoing cycle of consumption and growth. A millennium was a breath, a neon a prolonged moment of digestion. This made them utterly indifferent to the brevity of individual lives or the fleeting existence of entire species. Their focus was simply the next meal, the next star to absorb, the next galaxy to fill their endless, collective moi. Full power to engines. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Eva barked, her voice cutting through the silence of terror like a razor, the first clear command that wasn't a question. Miller, I need everything you've got out of those thrusters. Lee, prepare a blind jump. Any coordinates, anywhere, just get us out of here. Now. Miller, despite his shaking hands, was already hunched over his console. Engines are responding, Commander. Pushing past treadline. Structural integrity at 60% and falling. We can't hold much longer. They're pulling us in. A gut-wrenching shudder ran through the Ares V, the groan of protesting metal echoing through the bridge, the smell of burnt wiring suddenly sharp in the air. Sparks rained from a conduit near the ceiling. A warning klaxon blared, a desperate, wailing cry against the encroaching doom. Lee, his face a mask of grim determination, his brow furrowed in concentration, punched in random coordinates. A blind jump was a desperate gamble, a jump into an unknown void that could shred the ship or deposit them in a star, but it was their only chance. A single, agonizing prayer for a miracle. The hum of the Xylus intensified, a hungry, guttural roar that promised only one fate, oblivion. The sickly green light flared, and the drilling appendages began to glow with an ominous heat, a prelude to their feeding. The ship shuddered again, violently this time, as if something vast and invisible had scraped against its hull. Alarm screamed. The lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the panicked faces of the crew. As the Ares V lurches into a desperate, agonizing escape, pushing its engines to their absolute breaking point, the blackness of space behind them began to twinkle with the terrifying, bioluminescent glow of the swarm, drawing closer, faster than any human ship should be able to move. Eva braced herself, her heart hammering against her ribs, a silent prayer on her lips for a home she might never see again, for billions of lives unwittingly condemned by an ancient, unintended cosmic horror. The universe, they now understood, was far more hostile than they had ever dared to imagine, and that hostility, a ravenous, indifferent tide, was headed straight for home. The faint, ghostly images of Earth's forgotten broadcasts flickered across Lee's secondary screen, a cruel reminder of what they were fighting for, and what was about to be lost. Can the crew of the Ares V find a way to warn Earth, or is humanity destined to be another echo in the Xylus' horrifying cosmic library? And even if they warn Earth, what could humanity possibly do against a species that consumed civilizations, bred from their dust, and subjected their victims to an agonizing, prolonged dissolution? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, as the Ares V plunged into the blinding chaos of a blind jump, the phantom screams of devoured worlds echoing in Eva's mind,